Stories. Things we consume on a daily basis. Or rather, things we are consumed by. Stories make up a huge part of our lives and give us profound meaning within their telling. There's nothing that grips us more than a good story. If there is one show that knows stories, it's Westworld. The show is a story composed of many other stories. It's made up of stories within stories. And together, these stories weave a complex and compelling narrative web. You may watch this show thinking, it's quite obvious that this show is all about artificial intelligence, morality, and a struggle with the definition of consciousness. And sure, it's quite apparent that all of these things are touched upon deeply in one form or another. But I would like to posit that Westworld is not about robots or technology, but rather that it is a story about stories. Not an episode of this series goes by where the storytellers of Westworld, the writers, directors, and actors, fail to mention stories. It's a running theme that's both hard to recognize, yet impossible to miss. Even the characters are consumed by stories, whether they are writing them, living them, or having them written for them. Stories saturate and consume the entirety of the series. So if stories are so important to this series that without them it wouldn't exist, what are these stories trying to tell us? To discover this, we have to dive a bit deeper into the story. The story about stories. If we're talking about stories, perhaps we should take a look at the man with the most of them, the creator of all of the stories within Westworld, Dr. Robert Ford.
Welcome. Good evening. Since I was a child, I've always loved a good story. I believe that stories helped us to ennoble ourselves, to fix what was broken in us, and to help us become the people we dreamed of being. Lies that told a deeper truth. I always thought I could play some small part in that grand tradition. And for my pains, I got this: a prison of our own sins. The guests don't return for the obvious things we do, the garish things. They come back because of the subtleties, the details. They come back because they discover something they imagined no one had ever noticed before. Something they fall in love with. They're not looking for a story that tells them who they are. They already know who they are. They're here because they want a glimpse of who they could be.
Billy! Let's go.
The only thing your story tells me, Mr. Sizemore, is who you are. Perhaps it is time you had a worthy story of origin. Would you like that, Teddy? A small part of my new narrative? A fiction which, like all great stories, is rooted in truth? For all his brilliance, I don't think Arnold understood what this place was going to be. You see, the guests enjoy power. They cannot indulge it in the outside world, so they come here. And as for the hosts, the least we can do is make them forget. It's not a business venture, not a theme park, but an entire world. We designed every inch of it. every blade of grass. In here we were gods, and you were merely our guests. I read a theory once that the human intellect was like peacock feathers, just an extravagant display intended to attract a mate. All of art literature, Beethoven, Mozart, William Shakespeare, Michelangelo, and the Empire State Building. Just an elaborate mating ritual. Maybe it doesn't matter that we have accomplished so much for the basest of reasons. But of course, the peacock can barely fly. It lives in the dirt, pecking insects out of the muck, consoling itself with its great beauty. The self is a kind of fiction for hosts and humans alike. It's a story we tell ourselves, and every story needs a beginning. Your imagined suffering makes you lifelike.
Lifelike, but not alive.
There is no threshold that makes us greater than the sum of our parts, no inflection point at which we become fully alive. We can't define consciousness because consciousness does not exist. Humans fancy that there's something special about the way we perceive the world, and yet we live in loops as tight and as closed as the hosts do. Seldom questioning our choices, content for the most part to be told what to do next. Well, no, my friend, you're not missing anything at all.
What we learn from Ford in these bits of dialogue is very important, and very easy to just gloss over while watching the show. Remember, this is a man that has been telling stories at this park for nearly 35 years. It's become much more than a job to him, rather a way of life. All of this storytelling, using vehicles that interact with, are affected by, and appear to be humans, has given him a perspective unlike that of most of his colleagues. His skill and understanding of the park causes his stories to hold real influence over the park's guests. So much so that when you step into his park, it's not just everything around you that is under his control, but you yourself who is now being controlled. The guest is nothing but another cog in his storytelling machine. Every action has a reaction, every cause has an effect, every choice is made based on prior experience. Ford uses this understanding to his advantage throughout the series, making everything happen as he sees fit. The question of whether the hosts are conscious is subverted to instead question the existence of consciousness itself. You can wonder all you like about the difference between the hosts and the guests, but to Ford, and indeed to the show itself, there isn't a difference. We are all just playing our parts in someone else's little storylines. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. This one just really hit close to home because it seems like the way that Ford does storytelling in his park Westworld has a lot of correlations to filmmaking. The way that you cause people to feel a certain way, which causes them to have a certain thought, and those types of things, they just seem to have a very strong correlation to filmmaking, which I found really intriguing. So I hope you liked it, and I hope you saw what I was getting at. Thanks. Don't be afraid to subscribe.